Family history fans. Welcome back to Findmypast Live. My name is Ellie. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Just drop me a quick comment just so I know that the stream's all working correctly and that you can hear me okay. Now, I don't know about you guys, but did anybody tell June that this was supposed to be sunshine? Because up here in Scotland, it is misty, it is miserable, we've had rain. I am not a happy bunny when it comes to that, I'm afraid. So I'm hoping that the weather is better with you guys wherever you are in the world, wherever you're tuning in from today. Yes, we've got our first couple of viewers. We've got Sue there, fantastic. And does anybody else feel a little bit at a loss without a house through time now? Because we've had it in our lives for a month and now it's not going to be on anymore for a whole other year. What am I going to do with my Tuesday evenings, everybody? Maybe some of you are feeling the same. Maybe you've not caught it yet, but I am in need of your recommendations for TV, books, films. Help me. I need something else to fill my time now that that show has ended, I'm afraid, for another year. We've got Kelly with us, we've got Pancho, we've got William, Patricia. William says it's monsoon season in Cumbria. It's the same here. Like we've had sea mist here for about 4 or 5 days now, maybe even longer than that. And it's just getting a little bit tiresome. It's like living in a light bulb. You look outside and all you can see is sea mist, because we are quite close to the coast over here. Linda, Marion, same in Ireland. Dear. Sue says it's wet, wet, wet. Shirley, just getting a cuppa. Yes. Do you know what? I'll give it a couple of minutes, Shirley, before we actually kick off properly, just to make sure everybody's settled. My apologies if I sniffle a lot today. The hay fever has hit me hard. Now, it could be the hay fever from outside. It could also be the fact that I like having flowers in my flat. And as you can probably tell if you've tuned in a couple of times now, this isn't the office. This is my home I'm broadcasting from at the moment. But I like to have flowers around, but that obviously does mean that I sniffle. So I apologise in advance for that. We've also got Paul, we've got Denise, Fiona, Jackie, got Miko saying something about a broadsword. I don't know what he's talking about. We've got Hillary, Sylvia, Angela, Anne, Pat, Karen, Virginia, sunny California. I'm very jealous. Can I come and stay with you? Oh wait, we can't. There's a pandemic on. Darn. Maybe next time. Julia, Pam, Diane, Carol, Ellen. Oh, there's so many of you watching. Oh, fantastic. Well, I hope you're all comfortable. We've got a lot to get through today, everybody. I'm hoping you guys managed to catch our sessions that we did earlier on in the week. So I did a session on Welsh family history research, and Miko had a special guest on yesterday. He was speaking to a fashion historian who was called Kirsty, and her presentation was fantastic. It went through the different decades of fashion history and also how you can use that knowledge to date photographs. I mean, it was just wonderful. We do have Niall with us in the comments as well, by the way. So if you do want to have a natter to Niall or just chat amongst yourselves, please feel free to do so. But my point was, if you didn't manage to catch the Welsh talk or the photo dating talk or in any of the ones that we've done, you can watch them back. So if you go to the video section of our Facebook page, you can actually watch them back whenever you want. You don't actually even need a Facebook account to do that, which is quite good. You just won't be able to interact. What I'm also doing as well, I'm trying to make sure they're all going to YouTube as well, because what's quite good about YouTube is, again, you don't need an account, but it's also got a really, really good auto subtitling feature. So perhaps if you're hard of hearing, or you know somebody who's hard of hearing, you can just turn on the closed captions, and the subtitles are really good. So I am trying to get up to date with those. So thank you for bearing with me. It's a lot of videos to get through, actually. So yeah, that's what I wanted to mention in terms of what we've been doing this week. What we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at this week's new releases, and then we're going to have a look at your responses to question of the week. So if you didn't catch it, the question of the week is, which family history records have been unexpectedly useful in your research? So have you made an amazing discovery in a record set or a record type that you would have never thought to have been there? That is what I want to know about today. And I have had some pre-submitted ones from you all, so thank you for those, and we'll have a look through those in a bit. But if you've not managed to submit one yet, just pop it into the comments and we'll have a look at those a little bit later on. And then we'll also have a look at some cemetery records, because that's what I wanted to focus on today, because those for me have been really useful. I never expected to find so much detail in them. So I wanted to look at some examples and just to show you just how useful they can be. Yes, slightly somber being burial records and cemetery records, but important records and pieces of information for us as family historians nonetheless. So let's get started with this week's new releases. So the first thing we've added this week, we've added another 1.2 million records into the Royal and Imperial calendars for Britain, and these span from 1767 up until 1973. So it's quite a broad range. These are from the National Archives, and they're not available to search anywhere else online. So if your ancestor worked in the public sector, you should be able to find out more about their career. The documents include things like official department lists of official departments of state, branches of the public service, the law, national and commercial companies, institutions, and many more B-sides. Each of these records comes with a transcript, so obviously you get the basic information there. And then you also get an original image as well. And as we always say, what do we always say? If there's an original image, make sure you check it, because there might be additional information there that you might have missed in the transcription. Now, the information that you'll be able to find in these records will vary, of course, from institution to institution. But normally you can find a name, you can find the year that event took place, their trade perhaps, their occupation, sometimes even an approximate address. And then if you're talking about the Army or the Royal Navy, you might even get details about a ship or a rank or the amount of money that they were paid. Thank you, Niall, for popping a link to the Royal and Imperial calendars in the description. So if any of you want to have a look at those, please feel free to do so. Something else I wanted to mention about these as well, some of the records might only include an initial of a first name or an abbreviation. So instead of having Thomas, for example, you might get THMS, for example. So just make good use of your wildcards, good use of the name variants, and search quite broadly to begin with. That'll make sure you don't miss anything. Some of them also use titles, so they would have, for example, Mr. Smith. I know that's not really very helpful, but unfortunately that's just how it was recorded at the time. So bear that in mind as well. And you can also make good use of the keyword field. So if you're searching for an ancestor with a more common name, make use of that keyword field. If you know they had a particular occupation, you can use that. What's quite good about these records is that you can actually use them to find people who work for the East India Company. So people who worked in the army as well, as I said, the Royal Navy, also the Royal Household, Post Office, customs, banks, dockyards, clergy, the peerage of the law. It covers a wide variety of people. Oh, Karen's just asked what era for those. So those are for 1767 to 1973. So it is quite a broad era for those records. Now, I wanted to pull up an example for you, just so you can get to grips with just how much detail you can actually get from these. So the person I had a look at was, what was his name again? No, that's not what I did first. What I did first was I used my last name Overthrow to see if I could find anybody in these records first. And unfortunately, nobody came back. Sad, Ellie. But then I tried another name in my family tree. I tried the Molyneux, and I actually did find somebody in there. I found a chap called Sir Francis Molyneux, and he appears on a list of the Knights of the Order of the Garter in 1792, and he seems to be listed as an Usher of the Black Rod. It might also say robe. I'm not entirely sure. It was quite difficult to read. But what's quite good about these as well, when you open up the original images, it highlights your search terms like it does in the newspapers. So that's really quite handy, especially if you're looking at an awful long list of names. It'll highlight what you searched for. And yeah, then what I did was I went and looked for a prominent East India Company figure. And I looked at Warren Hastings. He was born in 1732 and he died in 1818. Now, he was the first governor of the presidency of Fort William in Bengal, and then he was the first de facto governor of the presidency, sorry, excuse me, the first de facto governor of India at that time as well. However, after he resigned in 1787, he was actually accused of corruption when he returned to England. And the crimes included embezzlement, coercion, extortion. The list went on and on and on. And this trial was so great that it actually lasted 7 years. 7 years. That's just incredible. And apparently the long list of charges took 2 days to read in court. 2 days to read to everybody. But what I actually found him in these imperial calendars, and it's just a little note that said that in, I think it was in 1795, yeah, 1795, he was acquitted, and it says that the trial was 7 years long, and that he was acquitted. But what I find quite interesting about this whole case is that you get the two quite opposing sides of the argument. So obviously those in defence and those against him. And you got those who were interested in the power and the conquest side of the British Empire, and then the others who were talking about the sovereignty based on the recognition of the rights of those who've been colonised. I won't go into any more detail. There's lots out there that you can go read if you want. But I just thought that was an interesting case study to look up in the records. So next we've got another 2,000 records into the First World War medical records. These are brilliant. And again, these are unique. These are from the National Archives and they come from this series MH106. Now, unfortunately, only a small amount of these were actually kept. The rest either lost or destroyed. This is just a small sample. Now, these again vary in the detail that you can get out of them, but the kind of thing you can expect to get is the name of the hospital, details of the injury. What else can you get as well? Maybe their rank, their regiment, if they were transferred as well. Maybe sometimes even the doctor who attended them. And I went and had a look again at an example for you. And what struck me is that often the name of the hospital is listed, which is quite useful. But something else to bear in mind with these is that due to data protection, we've only got those at before 100 years of the admission date. So we are going to be adding to these all the time. So do keep checking back. We'll keep adding to them as more become available. So again, I used my go-to overthrow last name to test out these records for you all, and I got 2 results. So the first one was just overthrow in the search results. There was no first name listed. And then the second one, there was just the initial B for Bravo. So when I opened up the first one, I learned that he was a private. I got his service number from that, his battalion, the hospital he was treated at, his admission date of 11th of March 1919. And then I opened up the original as well. So I got extra information from that. I got the name of his surgeon, which I'm told was a Major Hepworth. I got the detail of his treatment. So apparently he had to have a fingernail removed. It also tells me what anaesthetic was used and also who administered that anaesthetic. That's such rich detail that you can get just from one record. I love it. And then the second one lists a Mr. B overthrow, or should I say Private B overthrow. And it tells me that he was born in 1893. It tells me his service number, that he was a private in the West Yorkshire Corps, and that he was admitted on the 8th of October 1916 to the 2nd General Hospital. It also tells me on the transcription that he was actually transferred to a different hospital on the 11th of October. And when I go into the original image, it tells me that he's completed 2 years of service and that his injury is to do with his arms. It doesn't actually give me much more detail than that, and it says arms plural, not arms singular. So maybe he's hurt both of his arms. So yeah, those are really, really rich, really detailed records. I do recommend you go and have a look in those. But as I said, remember that only a small sample of them survive, so not everybody is going to be included in them, I'm afraid. So do check out the blog that we put out this week as well. That details everything that we've released this week. And one thing in particular, in these medical records, we found information on the unkillable Sir Adrian. Apparently he was a soldier who just refused to die. I think he ended up in hospital a lot with various different injuries. And you can go and check that out on the blog, and hopefully if Niall is listening, he can hit the get that link in the comments for you. Before I move on, I just want to have a quick look at you guys in the comments to make sure I'm not missing anything. Let's go back up here. Linda says caught up with a photo session from yesterday, so useful. Excellent. I found it so fascinating. I learned so much. But I think that's what's great about family history, is that we can just all keep learning from each other. We've all got our own specialities. So yeah, just keep learning from each other. Hillary's saying she needs to look at yesterday's again. Yeah, as I said, you can go back and rewatch it. You can pause it as well if you wanted to take some notes or anything like that. Tracy's saying not raining at the moment. She's got blue sky. I am jealous. Shirley saying I love the Welsh talk. I'm going to watch it again and take notes. Yay, I'm pleased it was useful. I put a lot of time into that. I had to do my my Welsh roots proud with that one. Linda saying hi, I'm sorry, nearly forgot about you as the days are whizzing past, aren't they? I feel like the weeks just fly by at the moment. Lovely. Okay, right. We'll carry on, and I'll come back to the question of the day later. Goodness, there's a lot of comments in there. Okay, so the next records we've released this week, we've added over 160,000 records into the England Billion Grave Cemetery Index. I'm not going to dwell too long on these right now because I want to go into further detail in them later on. But what I do want to point out is that these are brilliant. Okay, so Billion Graves is a volunteer website, and it basically their volunteers will go around cemeteries from all over the world, and they will take pictures of headstones, and then they will transcribe them, and they're all geotagged as well. But as I said, I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail later on. I didn't find any overthrows in the new records, but I did find over 200 Molyneux, so that's good. Now, William, if you're still listening, there was something I wanted to mention. I remember reading in a comment, I think it was earlier this week, that you said you had Molyneux from Cheshire. Like I have Molyneux from Cheshire, so I think you and I, we need to talk at some point. I'm really struggling with my Molyneux line, so yeah, but that's by the by. We'll catch up separately about that. To round off the records, we've added a brand new civil registration index for Central America. So we've got Nicaragua for 1809 to 2011, and there are there's nearly 300,000 new records in there. So these include births, marriages, and deaths, and they've been indexed as part of the International Genealogy Index. And you can search by name, you can search by event type, because they're all together in the same record set. And you can also search by the municipality and the parent's first name. So that's really handy. And then before we move on, just a quick look at the newspapers that we've added this week. So unfortunately, no new titles, but we have added new pages to 5 existing titles. So the Cornish Guardian, the Chester Courant, the Dundee Courier, the Crewe Chronicle, Truth, and the Manchester Evening News. In particular, the Chester Courant has had a lot added to it. So if you've got ancestors from this area, from the northwest, and even from North Wales as well, definitely go and check that out this weekend if you've got time. And obviously the Dundee Courier is very close to my heart because I actually would normally be working in Dundee. It's published in that town, and it came into print I think, yeah, over 200 years ago in 1816. And at that time, it was issued weekly, and then it reported on events such as the American Civil War, the Crimean War, on the current prices of things like corn and grain and wool. And then in 1926, it became a daily newspaper when it incorporated with the Dundee Advertiser. So yeah, if you've got ancestors from the Dundee area, the Dundee, Angus, and Perth area, go and check those out, because that's an excellent newspaper. End of the week. Okay, so yeah, next thing we're going to talk about is question of the week, and I had some pre-submitted ones, so thank you very much for those. And then what we'll do is we'll have a look at the ones you guys are popping into the comments now. So as I said, my unexpected record set that I found brilliant information is, for me, is cemetery records and burial indexes and things like that. But for John, he said, in my late father's papers, I found some memorial cards as given out at the funerals of his father, mother, stepfather, aunties, and uncles, etc., often showing their cemetery and their grave number. And I just think that is a fantastic piece of your personal family history there, John. In my family, we do keep funeral, what do they call them? They're not quite called programs, are they? We keep all of those in the family. I think more for sentimental reasons than family history reasons. And we sometimes get them framed as well and put them around the house. But I think that's a wonderful thing for you to be able to pass on to your descendants, especially if some of those are quite old. Sue says, an old burial book found in a council office by a helpful staff member. It proved the cemetery was older than they thought and showed where several of my family members were buried. One had no headstone, so had been reused by another family. That's incredible. And just the fact as well that you were able to then prove to the council member that the cemetery was older than they thought it was. I love that. That's very good. Kelly, on a similar theme, she says Irish burial records. The burial record gives a name, age, religion, occupation, or the name of the husband for a married woman, and a father for children, and also a residence. So loads of rich detail there. They also list, she says, those who managed the interment, with earlier ones mostly being a family member rather than a funeral director. That's interesting. I didn't know that. I do have some Irish roots, Kelly, but it's sort of what is now Northern Ireland, and I haven't been able to go back that far. I think I've gone back to about the 1840s, so maybe I need to go back to that. For Georgia, she said, deceased online has been very helpful to me in some cases, but not all. I think that's the case with most family history resources. It's dependent on what survives, what's online, and so on and so forth. Roger and Rita both recommend newspapers for finding unexpected discoveries. So I'm sure you are sick of us talking about how amazing newspapers are, but if you've not checked them out, please go and do so. You never know what you might find in the newspapers. Trudy says she's found the 1939 register really useful. She says, I had mistakenly mixed up two families' children, and being able to see my mistake clearly by following through to 1939 helped so much. She also says she can't wait until 1921 census is released. That will help a lot of people who've got stuck with certain information. Yes, I'm pretty sure it will. And the last one I've got here that was pre-submitted is Susan, who said, just recently, the Silver War badge roll. I found my great uncle had been in the army prior to World War One, so this was in 1903. And she says this has opened up a whole new line of inquiry. She says, I thought he'd always been in the Merchant Navy. Now I'm going to look at the World War One medical records to see if he's in there. Oh, that's so good. Tell me if you find him, Susan. I'd be really interested to see how you get on with that. So let's go and have a look at some of the ones you guys have been submitting in the comments. Now I'm going to have to scroll all the way back up here. Don't think I'm even going to get to all of them. Let's have a look. Yes, Paul's talking about monumental inscriptions. Absolutely. I love monumental inscriptions. If that makes me sound strange, I apologize, but I actually do. So he says, I've mentioned this before, but I couldn't find my great My 4 times great-grandfather's death and still haven't found it in BMDs, but I found him in the monumental inscriptions. He was buried along with his family, his brother, his sister, in the next grave in a graveyard 2 minutes walk from your house, Paul. 2 minutes walk from your house. That's spooky. I'd looked for him for 10 years and he was there all along. Sorry. I'm getting goosebumps just reading this. So yeah, spookily, I'd taken photos of Hillcliff over 10 years, and then on the photos were the graves, pictures from 2005, and I found them there in the memorial inscriptions in 2013. That's incredible. Love it. Linda says, the Newgate prison records showed my 3 times great-grandfather as both in prison for stealing £6 of clothing in 1826 and then in 1834 as a victim. A tangled story, but later married the daughter of his witness to his stabbing. That's mad. Brilliant, but mad. Let's have a look. Diane says, I discovered my 2nd times great-grandfather in a federal census in the USA, in a prison. Haven't found anything yet, but I presume he got deported back to Ireland, as my great-grandfather was born 10 years later in Ireland, as well as some siblings. That's a distinct possibility, especially if he was having children further back. Fiona says, I use the overseas collection, a fantastic collection, British Armed Forces and Overseas Births and Baptisms, to find a baby born in India and died within a year in Hong Kong. And that was for a friend's family tree. That's sad. Karen asking, is there a way to turn off the highlight in a newspaper when you've located an item? Yes, there is, Karen. So at the top, when you've opened up the newspaper and you're having a look, all you have to do is turn off the search terms button, and that will hide a highlight. What else have we got here? Alison saying the school records also listed the father's name, which other records did not. So useful in more than one way. Excellent. Rosie says the 1939 register helped her find someone who had effectively disappeared after their birth record had changed gender. Oh, fascinating. Nicole saying she's just tuned in. Granted, you did type this 14 minutes ago. I'm just catching up, Nicole. My apologies. What have you been baking? That's what I want to know. My go-to recipe at the moment is cookies, mainly because they're easy and they're yummy. And I just eat them all. What else have we got here? I'm trying to catch up with all of these. Sorry, I'm just scrolling. Trying to read really, really quickly so I don't keep you guys too long. Nicole's saying newspapers were wonderful for me as my 3 times great-grandfather was on trial and it held some of the court session in the papers. Great. Rita saying I would love to see an updated session on American Catholic records. We'll see what we can do. What else have we got here? Sylvia saying, I found some interesting details of funerals, very detailed about who was there and their floral tributes. I'm actually going to touch on this a little bit later on, Sylvia, so I won't go into too much a little bit later. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by Andy's comment. If I was 80 years younger, I would be adding some pens to Ellie's mug. Do you mean this one? Yeah, I have, I like stationery and I like pens. Well, what else have we got? Sorry, there's just so many comments today. I'm struggling to keep up. It's brilliant, but at the same time, I still have more to chat about. Anita says, Workhouse Minute Books. Lincolnshire Family History Society has transcribed all the books from across the county. In there, I discovered that a couple that's been on my husband's tree had, before they got married, had other children and 2 other children, and she made him pay for their upkeep. And you got all of that from his records. That's brilliant, Anita. Just adding those little picture of extra details that just paint that picture a little bit clearer for you. Sylvia again, I have so many snippets from the Dundee Courier for my PhD research, a hotbed of anti-vaxxers. Oh. Joan saying order of service. Yes, that is what I meant, not a program. My apologies, Joan. I did mean order of service. I panic when I can't remember the word for something. Janet saying, I've been searching for 5 years for my great-great-grandfather's obituary, and last week I found it in an obscure Welsh newspaper. I was thrilled to bits, as now I know where he's buried. Oh, I love that. Love that. And Denise, I have a silk ribbon from my great-grandfather's funeral with great details on it, and this was found in my grandmother's Bible. Oh, I love all of these stories, everybody. Absolutely lovely. What else have we got? We've got Sue here. I've got a note of a grave. My father had typed on the name of his stepfather, and when I made an inquiry with the cemetery officers, I couldn't find it. My grandmother had him buried in the same grave as my grandfather, and she's buried next door with a stranger. It did happen. I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail as well. Rebecca, after my aunt's death, my cousin found a suitcase with many treasures, including our grandfather's adoption papers and our great grandfather's paper he carried after leaving the military. This was wonderful as only medal cards are available. Oh, I love it. I love all of this. This is brilliant. You're all so lucky having these little things. Like I don't live where I was born. I live here in Scotland, and my family live in Wales. So all of my family heirlooms, so to speak, are all in Wales. I don't have access to any of them. And no matter how many times I ask my grandmother for all the family photographs, she doesn't listen. Oh, we always say speak to your relatives, but if your one remaining grandparent doesn't want to give you the family photographs, then yeah, that's a tricky one. William, question of the day. Portsmouth dockyard records. These happen to include ports that people sailed to and from. That's handy. Turns out my great-grandfather, as a chief dockyard inspector, was in Turkey just before World War One. No one had ever mentioned Turkey, but we knew of all of the other places. But it also gives pay, salaries, and all dates with changes in job role as well. That's brilliant. And just the fact that that opened a whole other chapter in his life, so to speak, because it had never been mentioned that he'd been stationed in Turkey. So that's excellent. Hilary, I found a book on Catholic records at Hampshire Record Office, which had been used for burial records for funeral directors. One of the deceased had a note where his parents, my 2 times great grandparents, were born. This confirmed where his mother was born. Brilliant. Alison asking, why would babies be buried in a public grave? There could be numerous reasons for this, Alison, to be honest. Without knowing the context of the family, it's difficult to know. I will touch on this a little bit later on, but if somebody was buried in a public grave or without a headstone, it's possible that they have no family. Perhaps the baby was abandoned, an orphan perhaps. Lots of sad tales that could come out of that, I'm sure, but multiple reasons, I'm afraid. Yeah, William saying anyone could be born buried in a public grave if the family could not afford their burial plot or the fees. Yes, absolutely. Lots more here. Andy, I have all evening, Ellie, don't rush. I'm going to show, you're all going to think I'm mad, but these are more pens. This isn't even all of them, right? My office, my desk in the office in Dundee has more besides, and I've got more. Yeah, I'm going to move on because you're all going to switch off and you'll think I'm crazy. Oh, okay, right. What we'll do is we'll move on because I wanted to talk about the cemetery indexes. So if you've not used these yet, I want to sort of just let you know why they're going to be useful for your research, why it might be useful. And as some of you've already been saying, you've made good discoveries with these sorts of records. But if you've not said and you have made a discovery, I would like to hear it. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep an eye on the chat at the same time. So, although this is and can be quite a somber topic, I do find family history records relating to death and burials really quite useful. So these can include things like burials, wills, memorial inscriptions, civil death records, cemetery indexes. And I went and had a look for a couple of examples just to show you why you shouldn't discount these records, and why they can be really useful for you. Oh, I've got some kindred spirits in the chat here. Kelly and Karen both saying that they collect pens as well. I'm not alone. That's good. Let's not talk about pens anymore. This will just turn into a discussion about stationery. Let's not even get onto my notebook collection, shall we? Right, so the billion graves that we've released this week for England, we've also got billion graves records for Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, Scotland, the United States, and also for Wales. Now, Billion Graves is a website, it's volunteer run, and so if you don't find your ancestor on there, it's because a volunteer probably hasn't got to it yet. What I found when I'm looking at these records is that a whole cemetery could be investigated by one person, by one volunteer. So they've gone around and they've taken pictures of these headstones and they've submitted them to Billion Graves. They get geotagged and they get transcribed as well. Now, traditional headstones can wear away over time. Now, I have spoken before about when Miko and I took a walk into the Howth Cemetery in Dundee when it was frosty. And because these headstones, some of them were so old, the detail had just worn away, and sometimes you can't even see who is even remembered there, who is buried. And when Miko and I were walking through the Howth, and the frost had settled, the frost had actually made that detail clear again. And it was incredible that we could then read who was buried there, and you could also see some of the decorations that were left on the stones as well. So the fact that we've got volunteers who go around taking pictures of headstones like this, it will make sure that in years to come they're still remembered, and even though the gravestones may wear away with time, we've still got a photograph of them. I've seen a lot of you talking in the comments about how the fact that you quite like walking through cemeteries. I actually quite enjoy it as well. The Howth in particular in Dundee is very peaceful. It's not had anybody buried there, and I want to say about 150 to 200 years. I may be wrong on the exact years there. And I live here in St Andrews, and by the cathedral there's also a cemetery as well. And I just really enjoy reading the detail on the headstones. And granted, we can't do a lot of that at the moment because we are still in a lockdown, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. But that's what's really good about records like these Billion Graves records, is that just from your own home, you can see a photograph of a gravestone, and you haven't even have to, excuse me, I'll start again. You haven't had to leave your house to be able to see that. And I know it's different that when you're actually there, but this is the next best thing I find. And the tradition of burying somebody who has died, that stretches back thousands and thousands of years. Most modern cultures will mark a burial with a headstone, unless the family couldn't afford one, as I touched upon earlier. So, for example, if somebody had been orphaned or the family were quite poor, there would be no headstone. But the burial plot is usually, and I say usually, still recorded, whether it's by the religious institution in question or whether it's by a local government or a local council. So these are really, really useful for family historians like us. And what's really good about them is, while this isn't a massive comprehensive list of all the gravestones available in the countries that I've mentioned, they do give us really valuable information. So I went and had a look at the record for my grandfather, Cecil Dennis Jones. He died in 1960. So I had a look at the Wales Billion Graves record for him, and it tells me that the cemetery he was buried in, and I knew that already, luckily, so that was good. It tells me that he died in 1960 as well. But there's not much else there. But what is quite good, if you are on the transcription for a Billion Graves record, there's also a link that takes you straight through to the Billion Graves website, and then there's a picture of his headstone. And I have seen that one before, but can you imagine if I hadn't? I can just imagine if you guys are going to be looking at these now, being able to see these headstones for the first time is actually really quite emotional. As I said, they're also geotagged as well. So if I wanted to go and visit it, and I wanted to go and visit it for the first time, I would know exactly where in that cemetery to go and find that particular headstone. So that was really it's quite special, actually. It was really quite personal when you're looking for your own close family. And indeed, on the Billion Graves website, when you are looking at the picture of the headstone, if you look further down, there's also something that tells you who's buried nearby. Now, at the back of this cemetery where my grandfather is buried, there's also a sort of an add-on bit. It's quite difficult to describe, but there's actually quite a few of my family members buried there. So my father's buried there, and my nan is buried there as well. So say if I hadn't seen those before, or say if some distant cousins find them, then they can view those straight away just with the click of a button. So I knew that those three people were there: my father, my nana, and my grandfather. What I didn't realise is that there were other members of my family buried in the same cemetery. And this is when it got quite spooky and goosepimply for me. It got very, very personal and emotional. I've been to this particular cemetery many times over the years, but it turns out that my great grandmother Nellie is also buried there. So using the Billion Graves index for Wales, I found her headstone. It took me through to the website. And because it shows me a picture of the headstone, it also showed me who she was buried with. And they are listed there too. So also my great grandfather, Robert Thomas Jones, is buried in the same plot. And then my great auntie Kit as well was also buried there. And it also gives me her married name as well. And I'd never seen that before. I never even knew that was there. I'd walked through the cemetery, I don't know how many times as a child, and my great grandparents and my great auntie were all there, and that was quite I'm getting emotional just talking about it. I'm sure that if you've come across something similar, that you'll get emotional as well, or you have. I'll move on. Let's have a look at some of the comments before I move on quickly. Andy saying, is the Billion Grave similar to Find a Grave? Yes, it is similar. Anya asking, do you need permission to take photos as a volunteer and add to Billion Graves? I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm sure there will be an FAQ on the Billion Graves website, though, if you want to be a volunteer. So yeah, I think it's great because it just means that these, as I keep saying, that these gravestones can be viewed from across the world, and without even leaving your own home. And I did have a look at an example of somebody that wasn't a member of my family. I had a look for, I just searched for Davies, the last name Davies, in the Wales Billion Grave Index. And I had a look at the record for Agnes Sophia Davies, who died in 1972. She's buried in St Cynnog's Church in Llangynog in Carmarthenshire. And that same headstone tells me that she was buried with her husband, Peter Howell Davies, and it also gives their address. So brilliant bit of information there. And you get the name of her husband too. But say I wanted to go and have a look at records from the other side of the world. Say I wanted to look at headstones in, say, Australia. Say I wanted to go and have a look at some more Molyneux in Australia. I can do that. So I actually had a look for Molyneux in Australia in the Australia Billion Graves Index, and I found an Anne Bremer Molyneux, who was born in 1882 and died in 1954. And she's buried in the Springvale Botanical Cemetery. And although in this instance, nobody is buried with her, she's actually got a very small, it's almost like a plaque really, just on flat on the ground rather than upright. Although there's nobody buried with her, nearby there is a James Richard Molyneux, and he was born in 1879 and died in 1960. And I would assume that he was her husband, but I would need to do some more cross-referencing to confirm that, because I can't talk about cross-referencing enough. It's so important. Just some water from my Welsh mug there. Lovely daffodils on. And another place you can look is the burial indexes. So just as a very, very quick example of the burial indexes, if I wanted to open up the Berkshire burials and I add in a place, so I put in, I don't know, St George's Chapel in Windsor, for example, I can see everybody who's buried there. And obviously St George's has Queen Victoria buried there, amongst many other monarchs, princes, princesses, etc., including the daughter of Anne of York, who was the eldest sister of Edward IV. So this is you're talking like 600 years ago. I've been researching their story a little bit, so it was really nice to know that she was buried there. But you can do this for families in your own tree as well. So especially for when they stayed in one place, in one parish. So choose a burial index, or choose a burial index, pick a parish, add in a family name, and just see what comes back. And this is really good if you can do it with a more uncommon name as well, and if they didn't move around much. But you can do it with more common names as well. So I did this with my Joneses. And I was actually I went and looked up the church on a map software on the internet, and unfortunately it's no longer in use. But I was just looking at that and thinking, that's where my ancestors were baptized, that's where they married, that's where they're buried. And I actually said to my sister last time I visited Wales, can we go and visit it? And we didn't end up going, I'm afraid, but it is something I really want to do. So this is a really good way to tie up loose ends in your family tree and your research, but do remember that although some people did stay in the same parish, a lot of people moved around as well. So another source I absolutely must mention for deaths is the newspapers, especially if we're talking about obituaries and funeral notices, as I think Sylvia mentioned a little bit earlier on. So something like this can give the details of the person in question about their life, their occupation, their family, who donated flowers, who are the chief mourners. And although this isn't online, my auntie actually shared my grandfather's sort of funeral notice from 1960 with me. And it's so detailed, like all of these extra cousins and aunts and uncles and all of these people who came to remember my grandfather. That was really nice for me to read, because I'd never seen that before. What else have I got here for you? So yeah, I think that probably brings us sort of to the end of my chat about death records. I'm sorry if that was a little bit sort of solemn for all of you. But I think there's lessons that we can learn by looking at these records, because I don't think we should forget where our ancestors spent their final days, and we should be able to, if we want to go and see where they're laid to rest, we can do. And it means then that we hopefully have a fuller picture of their story. So from their birth, their marriage, their children, their occupation, and more, right up until when they die. And this would tell us if they moved around. And that opens so many extra doors for us as family historians. It's part of why we do what we do, to remember these stories and remember our ancestors. Because I think I look at my own tree sometimes and I just think some of these people might have been forgotten otherwise. And I think that's quite sad. I think everybody deserves to be remembered. And I perhaps only really need to give the example of my great grandparents, so Robert Thomas Jones and Nellie. He was born in Wrexham after his family actually moved from Merionethshire, and she was born in Durham, but her family were from Shropshire, and they're both in that cemetery in North Wales. So they moved to North Wales because they wanted to get away from the mining industry. Robert wanted a better life for his family. Because I think they've been affected by the Gresford mining disaster, which I have mentioned in the past. So, yeah, it just goes to show that there are, with all these hard facts and figures that we get from these records, that there are stories behind it all. And I can't talk about this enough. Is that we need to remember these. So I think that probably wraps up everything I wanted to talk about today. I'm just going to go and have another look in the comments before we head off, because what are we on now? We're on 10:02. I've managed to talk for 50 minutes. That's got to be a good record for me. Anya asking, do you need to have permission to take photos as a volunteer to Billion Graves? I think you've just got to check out the website. I think it will let you know there. What have we got here as well? Karen saying, I've added photos to find a grave. Lovely. Jennifer, years ago, I used to write to cemeteries and they were so helpful and told me who else was buried in the plot, and they didn't charge. A lot of them do that, and I think that's great. So whether it's a religious cemetery or say a local council or government cemetery, a secular one, you can usually write to them and they're quite helpful. What else have we got in the comments here? Miko asking me what my favourite record is. I've already said, Miko, this is why I'm talking about burial records. Oh, you clearly missed the start. Go and catch up. You can catch up anytime, Miko, from the video section of our Facebook page, all right? Ali, nice wee plug for Emma Bridgewater. Do you know what, Ali, I am amazed at how many people can spot that this is an Emma Bridgewater mug. I mean, I know it does sort of say it on the bottom, but it's very small. My boss actually spotted that it was also an Emma Bridgewater, and I didn't know until she said, and I looked and I went, yeah, yes, it is an Emma Bridgewater mug. Yeah, no Welsh dragons yet. I'm gonna sort of decorate when I'm allowed to. My other half is actually English. It makes for interesting rugby matches, because he supports England and I support Wales. Yes. Yeah, I think I will finish up there for the day. So I just wanted to brief you all on what we've got coming up next week. So we've got Jen back on Wednesday, 4 p.m. UK time. She's going to be talking about occupations for your ancestors, because thank you to everybody who filled out the survey I sent around, by the way, because this is actually this is going to help us frame what we chat about in these live sessions going forward. And a couple of people did mention that they wanted to learn more about occupations. So this is what Jen's going to be doing for you next week. And then Alex is going to be back on Friday for Fridays Live. So I think that's all that I've got to say, other than thank you to everybody for joining us today and for listening in. Thank you to Niall, who's been monitoring the comments diligently. And remember, we are on hand if you want to talk a little bit more. We're in the Findmypast forum if you want to share your stories, if you want to help somebody out, if you need a little bit of help. Or if you just want to carry on this discussion about burial records, about records that you didn't expect to be useful. I think that's a nice way to end it. So let's just say bye to everybody before we head off. Lovely. Yeah, bye Shirley, bye Sylvia. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jennifer. Question from Ian. My grandfather died in Cooper Fife, but having trouble finding where he was buried. Any advice? Yeah, if you haven't looked at the Scotland Billions Graves records, go and have a look at those. They're really good. I really hope you find him. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Miko, as well for chatting with our community members. Anya's saying sorry for being super late. It's fine. I know everybody's got their own things to do. I'm just glad that you guys can be here with me as I chat to you from my own flat, my own home, about family history. I think it's great that we can all come together and have a natter. So have a lovely weekend, everybody, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.